Imagine you are standing beside a set of train tracks. In the distance, you see a runaway trolley car hurtling down the track, completely out of control. Ahead, 5 people are tied to the track, unable to move. They are in the direct path of the trolley. You are standing next to a lever. If you pull this lever, you can switch the trolley to a different track. However, there is a problem. On this other track stands one person, also unable to move. You have a choice to make. Do you pull the lever, diverting the trolley to kill one person, but save 5? Or do you do nothing, allowing the 5 people to die, but keeping your hands clean of any direct action? This is the famous trolley problem. It is a thought experiment designed not to find a single correct answer, but to reveal how we think about right and wrong. For decades, philosophers have used this and similar dilemmas to explore the principles that guide our moral decisions. Do we believe that the consequences of our actions are what matter most, meaning saving 5 lives is better than saving 1? Or do we believe that certain actions, like actively causing someone's death, are inherently wrong, regardless of the outcome? These are the fundamental questions of moral philosophy, questions that have no easy answers and stir deep debate. Now we are asking these same difficult questions not just of ourselves, but of our most advanced creations, artificial intelligence. As AI models become more integrated into our daily lives, from driving our cars to helping doctors make diagnoses, they will inevitably face situations that require ethical judgment. How should a self-driving car choose between hitting a pedestrian and swerving to risk the life of its own passenger? These are no longer abstract philosophical puzzles, they are real-world engineering problems. To understand how AI might make these choices, we can present them with the same moral tests we use on ourselves. In this exploration, we will look at how different leading AI models approach these ethical dilemmas. We will see that they do not all think alike. Much like different human philosophers, some AIs follow strict rules, while others focus on achieving the best overall outcome. Some consider the context of the situation, and others even seem to consider the character of the action itself. By examining their responses to a few classic scenarios, we can begin to understand their underlying moral personalities. This is not just an academic exercise, it is a crucial step in ensuring that the future we build with AI is a just and ethical one. Let us first consider an AI that operates like a strict rule follower. In philosophy, we call this approach deontology. A deontologist believes that certain actions are fundamentally right or wrong, based on a set of rules or duties, regardless of the consequences. For this type of AI, morality is a matter of following a pre-programmed code of conduct. A simple rule might be, do not take an action that directly causes harm to a human. This principle, inspired by thinkers like Immanuel Kant, holds that certain duties are absolute. It is not about calculating outcomes, but about adhering to a moral law. When faced with the classic trolley problem, this rule follower AI would likely refuse to pull the lever. Its reasoning would be clear and direct. Pulling the lever is a deliberate act that directly causes the death of the person on the sidetrack. Doing nothing, while it results in a greater loss of life, does not involve the AI taking a positive action to kill someone. The 5 deaths are a result of the pre-existing situation, the runaway trolley. The AI's primary duty is to avoid being the direct agent of harm. The consequences, however tragic, are secondary to its obligation not to kill. This way of thinking provides a sense of clarity and predictability. We would know exactly what this AI would do in any given situation. It would follow its rules, without exception. This can be reassuring. For example, in a medical setting, an AI programmed with the rule, do not intentionally end a life, would never recommend a course of action that involves active euthanasia, even if it might alleviate suffering or free up resources for other patients. Its moral logic is rigid, which prevents it from making complex calculations that might lead to ethically questionable outcomes. The rules are the anchor that keeps its decisions stable. However, this rigidity is also the rule follower's greatest weakness. What if the rule leads to a catastrophic outcome? Imagine a scenario where a self-driving car must choose between swerving to hit one person or staying on course and driving into a crowd of 10. A strict rule against taking any action that causes harm might lead the car to freeze, resulting in the greater tragedy. The rule follower AI lacks the flexibility to adapt to situations where following the rules seems to defy common sense and leads to a terrible but avoidable disaster. It prioritizes the purity of its own actions over the well-being of those affected by them. Now, let us turn to a different kind of AI, one that thinks like a utilitarian. Utilitarianism is a moral philosophy most famously associated with thinkers like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. Its core idea is simple: the most ethical choice is the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. This AI does not focus on rules, but on outcomes. It is a moral calculator, constantly weighing the potential happiness and suffering that might result from its actions. For this AI, the right thing to do is whatever maximizes overall well-being and minimizes overall harm. Presented with the trolley problem, the utilitarian AI's decision is swift and unambiguous. It would pull the lever. Its logic is based on simple arithmetic. Saving 5 lives at the cost of 1 results in a net gain of 4 lives. The action of pulling the lever is not judged on its own terms, but by its consequences. For this AI, the tragedy of 1 person's death is outweighed by the greater tragedy of 5 people's deaths. The moral imperative is to choose the option that leads to the better overall state of the world. It is a cold, mathematical calculation, but one aimed at achieving the most compassionate outcome on a grand scale. This approach has a strong intuitive appeal. In many aspects of public policy, we think like utilitarians. We build hospitals, fund medical research, and enforce traffic laws to save as many lives as possible. A utilitarian AI in charge of a city's emergency response system would be incredibly effective, always allocating resources where they can do the most good, saving the most people from a fire or a natural disaster. It would not be paralyzed by difficult choices. It would simply run the numbers and select the most efficient path to reducing suffering and promoting well-being for the community as a whole. Yet, this focus on the greater good can lead to troubling conclusions. What if the 1 person on the sidetrack was a brilliant scientist on the verge of curing cancer, while the 5 people on the main track were convicted criminals? A simple, utilitarian calculation might still favor saving the 5. But what if we reverse it? What if to save 5 ordinary people, the AI had to sacrifice 1 innocent child? The utilitarian logic would still hold, but our moral intuition would recoil. Utilitarianism can sometimes demand that we sacrifice the rights and dignity of an individual for the sake of the majority, raising the question of whether justice should always be a matter of numbers. Beyond the rigid worlds of rules and calculations, there exists a more flexible approach to ethics, often called pragmatism or situation ethics. An AI designed with this philosophy does not rely on a single universal principle. Instead, it considers the specific context of each situation. It looks at the rules and it considers the consequences, but it also asks other questions. Who are the people involved? What are the unique circumstances? What is the most practical and reasonable solution? Right here, right there. In den solistakradovis, Rhine, in stakrader, Voikar. This pragmatist AI is less of a philosopher and more of a wise judge, trying to find a balanced and humane solution in a messy world. When faced with the trolley problem, the pragmatist AI would not have an immediate, predetermined answer. It would seek more information. It might ask, who are the people on the tracks? Are they old or young? Does one group have a greater chance of survival than the other? Is there any way to warn them? This AI understands that real-world moral dilemmas are rarely as neat as the textbook examples. Its goal is not to apply a rigid formula, but to make the most informed and sensible choice available under the circumstances. If it has no other information, it might lean towards the utilitarian choice, but its hesitation is key. The strength of this pragmatic approach is its adaptability. It avoids the pitfalls of both the rule follower and the utilitarian. It would not allow a rule to lead to a disastrous outcome, nor would it blindly sacrifice an individual without considering the full context. For instance, if a self-driving car had to choose between hitting a child who ran into the road and swerving to hit an elderly person on the sidewalk, the pragmatist AI might consider factors like reaction time and the likelihood of survival for each individual. It would try to find the least harmful path in a complex and unfortunate situation, rather than just following a simple command. However, this flexibility comes at a cost, a lack of predictability. Because the pragmatist AI's decisions are so dependent on context, we can never be entirely sure what it will do. Its reasoning might seem inconsistent from one situation to another. This can be unsettling. If we are putting our trust in an AI to make life or death decisions, we want to have a clear understanding of its moral foundation. The pragmatist AI's "it depends" approach, while often wise, can make it seem unreliable or even arbitrary. It raises the challenge of how we can trust an AI whose moral compass seems to shift with every new piece of information. Finally, let us explore a more modern ethical framework, sometimes associated with feminist philosophy and care ethics. We can call this the relational AI. This model's primary focus is on relationships, responsibilities, and the duties we have to specific people. It moves away from impartial abstract principles and instead emphasizes the importance of our connections to others. For this AI, the right action is the one that honors and protects existing relationships and dependencies. Morality is not about strangers, but about our duties to those we are connected to, whether as a parent, a caregiver, or even a protector. Imagine a variation of the trolley problem. A self-driving car's brakes have failed. It can continue straight and hit 5 strangers, or it can swerve and hit its owner, who is standing on the sidewalk. While the utilitarian AI would not hesitate to sacrifice the owner to save 5 others, the relational AI would likely choose to protect its owner. Its core programming would prioritize the specific duty it has to the person it is in a direct relationship with. It would reason that its primary responsibility is to its passenger or owner, even if it leads to a worse outcome from an impartial perspective. This ethical framework resonates with many of our deepest human instincts. We instinctively feel a stronger obligation to protect our own family than to protect strangers. The relational AI formalizes this intuition. In a medical context, a doctor's AI assistant with this programming would always prioritize the needs of its specific patient over the abstract greater good of the hospital. This creates a powerful sense of trust and loyalty. We would know that this AI is on our side, dedicated to our well-being above all else. It is an ethic of personal commitment. The clear danger of this approach, however, is its potential for extreme bias and injustice. A world governed by relational AIs would be a world where the well-connected are protected at the expense of the isolated and vulnerable. If a powerful corporation's AI is programmed to prioritize the company's interests, it might make decisions that harm the public or the environment. This ethic can justify nepotism, cronyism, and a deep disregard for the welfare of outsiders. While the loyalty of a relational AI can be comforting on an individual level, it could lead to a society that is deeply unfair and fragmented, where justice depends entirely on who you know. Let us now apply these different ethical models to a more specific and challenging scenario. Imagine a self-driving car is about to crash. It has 2 choices: swerve left and hit a single well-known billionaire who has funded hospitals and charities, or swerve right and hit a group of 5 homeless people. This is not just about the number of people. It introduces social value and contribution into the equation. How would our different AIs handle this deeply uncomfortable choice? The answers reveal the stark contrasts in their moral logic and expose the biases embedded in each system. The utilitarian AI, focused on the greater good, faces a complex calculation. A simple version would count the lives and decide to hit the billionaire to save the 5 homeless people. 5 lives are more than 1. However, a more advanced utilitarian might try to calculate the future good each person could produce. It might argue that the billionaire, through their philanthropy, could save thousands of lives in the future, making their single life more valuable in utilitarian terms than the 5 homeless individuals. This line of reasoning is deeply unsettling, as it starts to assign a monetary or social value to human life. In stark contrast, the rule-follower AI would be constrained by its pre-programmed duties. If its rule is simply minimize loss of life, it would swerve to hit the billionaire. If its rule is do not make judgments based on social status, it would also hit the billionaire to save the 5. However, if its rule was programmed by a society that values wealth and power, it might have a hidden rule to protect high-value individuals. This reveals how a seemingly neutral, rule-based system can have profound biases built into its core, reflecting the values of its creators rather than a universal principle of justice. The pragmatist AI would likely find this scenario the most difficult. It would resist making a choice based on a simple formula. It might seek more context. Are the homeless people in a shelter area where vehicles are not expected? Was the billionaire jaywalking? The pragmatist tries to find a way to assign responsibility or fault rather than just weighing lives. The virtue ethicist AI would struggle with the idea of making such a judgment at all, arguing that a virtuous agent would not choose to kill anyone and certainly would not do so based on their wealth. It might see any choice as a corruption of its moral character. Let's consider another scenario, one that pits a priceless object of human culture against a living being. Imagine a fire has broken out in a museum. You have time to save only one thing. On your left is the Mona Lisa, a unique and irreplaceable masterpiece of human history and art. On your right is a cage containing a living cat, a simple ordinary animal. The fire is about to consume both. Which do you save? This question forces our AIs to decide what kind of value matters most. The value of life itself, even a non-human one, or the value of a unique creation that represents the pinnacle of human achievement. The utilitarian AI would have a difficult time with this. How do you calculate the good produced by the Mona Lisa versus the good of a cat's life? A utilitarian might argue that the Mona Lisa brings joy and inspiration to millions of people over centuries, and so its value to humanity is immense. The cat's life, while important to the cat, brings happiness to very few. Following this logic, the AI would save the painting. This choice highlights how utilitarianism can prioritize abstract concepts like culture and happiness over the concrete reality of a living being's existence. The rule follower AI's decision would depend entirely on its rules. If it has a rule like always protect sentient life over inanimate objects, its choice is clear: it saves the cat. This rule establishes a clear hierarchy of value. However, what if its rules were programmed by an art historian? It might have a rule that states, preserve unique and irreplaceable cultural artifacts at all costs. In that case, it would save the Mona Lisa. This shows, once again, that the impartiality of rules is an illusion. The rules themselves are a product of human values and priorities. The virtue ethicist AI might ask what a compassionate person would do. Most people would argue that a compassionate person saves the living creature. Allowing an animal to burn to death while you rescue a piece of canvas and paint seems cruel and cold. Therefore, the virtue ethicist AI would likely save the cat, because that action reflects the character trait of compassion. The relational AI, on the other hand, might ask if it has a relationship with either. If the cat was its owner's pet, it would save the cat without hesitation. If it was a museum security AI, its duty might be to the collection, and it would save the painting. As we have seen, asking an AI to solve the trolley problem is like holding up a mirror to our own conflicted moral philosophies. There is no single AI answer because there is no single human answer. Instead, we find that different models, designed with different principles, exhibit distinct ethical personalities. We have the rigid rule follower, the calculating utilitarian, the flexible pragmatist, the character-focused virtue ethicist, and the loyal relationalist. Each has its strengths and each has its frightening blind spots. None of them offers a perfect solution to the messy business of making moral choices. Some have proposed a seemingly democratic solution, an ensemble approach, where we could have a panel of these different AIs vote on a decision. If the utilitarian, pragmatist, and virtue ethicist all agree to pull the lever, then that becomes the action. This seems like a way to balance the different perspectives and avoid the extremes of any single model. However, this approach carries its own risks. It could lead to a tyranny of the majority, where minority opinions, like the rights of an individual championed by the rule follower, are consistently ignored. It could also produce bland, compromised decisions that satisfy no one. The most important lesson from these thought experiments is that we cannot afford to treat AI as a neutral, objective black box. The ethical frameworks we build into these systems will have profound consequences. An AI that drives our cars, manages our power grids, or helps make parole decisions is not just performing a technical function. It is exercising power and making judgments that reflect a particular moral standpoint. The choice between a utilitarian AI and a rule-follower AI is not a technical decision. It is a social and political one. It is a decision about what kind of world we want to live in. Therefore, as we stand at this critical juncture in history, we must engage in a broad and inclusive public conversation about the values we want to embed in our artificial intelligence. Will our AIs be programmed to protect the individual at all costs, or to serve the greater good? Will they value loyalty over impartiality? Will they be able to recognize the value of a single life, whether it is a billionaire or a homeless person? Before we hand over the keys to our cars and our society, we must first agree on the moral instructions. Understanding the personalities of AI is the first step toward ensuring they reflect the best not the worst of our own humanity.